welcome everybody to today's cheese show. As it turns out, it's turning out, but welcome, and I'm especially pleased to welcome Kunal Pandya to today's session. We will make it interactive, so please, if you've got questions, put them in the chat so that I don't get distracted by cheese comments in the chat. Sorry, put your questions in the Q&A section so I don't get distracted by cheese. But welcome, Kunal. I'm delighted to be talking to you about a topic I know we're both really quite passionate about, actually.
Yeah, for sure, and thank you for having me. Yeah, it's great to talk about this topic. Great to talk to you guys, and really looking forward to it.
Brilliant, brilliant. Now, I just want to say to everybody, today's session isn't scripted. I don't have a big slide deck. You've just got two people who are really passionate about the topic being, how do you tackle the measurement of sales enablement? But two people who are really passionate about it and have kind of lived and breathed this for quite a while, essentially just having a really good natter about it. Now, I'm hoping as we go through, you'll all be comfortable asking questions as we go, and we'll aim to answer as many as we can. But other than a broad structure, we're just going to share our experiences. So to kick off, and I do have this one prepared in terms of a question to kick off, we've got to start somewhere, right? I want to get straight what we mean by measurement, right? Because measurement's all over the place. Measurement's been a topic of conversation for years, right? But I want to get really clear what we're talking about when we talk about measuring sales enablement. What's your opinion, Kunal? Let's frame it from you first.
Yeah, sales enablement metrics, you know, they've been around for a long time in terms of how we measure. And typically those metrics are kind of broken up into three categories. You have kind of behavioral indicators, leading indicators, and lagging indicators. And there's lots of them. And that's part of the problem, I think. Whenever in my experience in the past as an enabler, I've spoken with sales leaders and I've kind of talked about various metrics, you know, things like how many trainings somebody's completed, or the amount of content adoption we have, and time spent selling, and moving on to sort of more leading or lagging indicators around quota attainment or deal sizes, those kind of things. I often get this look of, okay, so what? Like, not in a negative way, right? In a way that says, well, how did that translate to driving this business forward? How does it translate to aligning to goals? And some of the problems are, you know, there are too many metrics, first of all, and it comes down to, well, which ones do we pick and choose? So when I think about metrics, I really think about four goals in mind. One, how do we align our enablement function to the organization, to the business strategy, to the revenue strategy of the company? That's the first goal. Second is, how do we use metrics to prioritize what we actually do and define that strategy from an enablement perspective? Thirdly, how can we use metrics to get stakeholder buy-in, but not just to get on board with what we're doing and what we're saying we should be doing, but also potentially to get investment to execute what we need to do. And lastly, and of course, most importantly, the obvious one is to measure why we're doing something, and then ultimately measure the outcomes and success of what we have done. It's a tricky one, and it always has been. And from my personal perspective, I'm a big fan of sales velocity. And I've used sales velocity to drive those four outcomes, right? Aligning enablement with business and revenue strategy, to help me understand what that strategy should be from an enablement perspective, and how do we prioritize what we do, and how do we justify that to stakeholders and our sponsors within the business, and ultimately to measure where do we stand, what do we do, and what were the outcomes. So yeah, sales velocity metrics are predominantly key to kind of what I do. And there's, I think, also, to expand on this a little bit, sales is hard, right? You know, it's hard in the best of times. And when we think about right now, without a global pandemic, without a global financial crisis, without all of those challenges that we're facing today, we are having to do more with less. And so the ability to measure what we need to do and the outcomes of that is just paramount right now, more than ever.
Yeah. Two quick questions that's come through from Conan, just so that everybody's on the same page. What's your definition of sales velocity?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, this is a webinar on its own, really,
Yeah,
on sales velocity.
don't take up the whole webinar unless I've got other stuff I want to get out.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, sales velocity is not something that I invented, right? It was actually invented by a company called Upland Altify, and they talk about the 4 factors that impact how much you sell, and just 4 factors. And those 4 factors are the number of active opportunities that you have at any given point in time, a period of time, the average deal value within that period of time, your average win rate over the same period of time, and the amount of time it takes you on average to close a deal, that length of sales cycle. Now, ultimately, when you turn that into an equation, you multiply the top line, which is opportunities, by deal value, by win rate, and divided by length of sales cycle, it spits out a number. That number is sales velocity, which in other words is the rate of revenue that you are delivering or generating on that periodic basis, right? So that's my definition of sales velocity. There's some great articles out there. Actually, I posted something on LinkedIn just today, actually. So have a look at my profile on that. But yeah, like I say, there's a big definition, a much more detailed definition of that. But on a high level, that's what it is.
We'll follow that up, Stephanie. To answer your question, we'll follow that up with a link afterwards that we're referring to.
Yeah.
You know, I think what's just going on from that alignment, there's 2 things. Of those 4 things that you highlighted: alignment, kind of focus / priority, justifying stakeholders and value. Do you know what really leaps out of me is the what's in it for me factor, right? Most of the people on this call are probably in sales enablement space. For me, I'm albeit part of a sales enablement organization, I'm in sales, right? Have been my entire career. And it always comes down to, am I doing something that's going to impact me? It's my time versus value, right? So it's so important to understand the measures that your stakeholders and your customers, right? Your customers in sales enablement are your salespeople ultimately. How am I best serving them? And if I'm best serving them, what is it that they're being measured by? Where is it that they're struggling on their measures, what they're KPI'd by, what they're doing? And then, and I don't have a link to this, I'll show it afterwards. But there was a brilliant study by Toyota, and they say ask the question why 5 times. Some people argue 7, but 5 times, which is keeping walking back. So if I'm a sales rep and I'm really struggling with, you know, getting prospects onto meetings, right? That's the area that I'm really, because I'm KPI'd by it, right? I'm booking meetings, I'm an SDR, that's where I am. We should be asking why over and over again until we get to root cause analysis, and that's what measurement's all about. It's not just saying go do more meetings or like maybe pick up the phone more, whatever it might be. It's asking the question why. And doing that repeatedly until you get to that root cause, and that root cause is that connectivity between what sales are measured by and what sales enablement can impact. And that for me is just, it's like a eureka light bulb moment. And that's exactly what sales velocity at an organizational level is doing. But I think that's really important. And again, you know, that focus, the second point you said there's lots and lots of talk in the market about measuring ROI from sales enablement. And I think that's really important, but I want to change that kind of phraseology from ROI to value, and understanding in the beginning where to focus to drive the most value. Because just measuring and saying, look at all this training we've done, and I'm not trivializing it, but look at all the training we've done, we've seen an X percentage increase. Being able to attribute value to the specific levers that you've pulled, and to be able to focus and prioritize in those places because you were measuring the right things in the first place, asking those whys to get to that root cause analysis is just phenomenal.
100%.
In my opinion.
100%. And you know, we can even take a step backwards and think about the challenging conditions that we're in, right? We've all seen about the tech layoffs. We're in a pending recession. It's only needs to be confirmed. All that said, companies are still buying, right? They're still spending money. However, that list of 50 projects that the CFO in an enterprise company was signing off before, right, before the pandemic, before it was probably more than 50, right? But just as a number, is now down to like less than 20, let's say more than half. So our sellers, in terms of the challenges they're facing, they're not just competing against the traditional competitors, right, in the space, based on the products that they're selling. They're competing against things and projects and budget requests that have got nothing to do with them, right? We're competing for mind share. We're competing against based on value, right? What is that project going to give us in terms of value and ROI versus this one? Right? And that's how we're positioning ourselves. And that's not even including the our fiercest competitive war of do nothing,
inertia,
right? Which is more prevalent than ever right now. And so when it comes to enablement, and you mentioned value of enablement, how do we equip our teams to be able to get through all of that noise, be the ones who are standing out, be the ones who are selling on value, and being that list of 20 projects that CFO is working on, right? And then they're going to prove it ultimately. I think one of the things that we need to certainly think about when it comes to the value of enablement is the problem we have is companies are, we know they're freezing their hiring plans, right? We know they're slowing down hiring as well. So not only are our sellers and our revenue teams having to do more with less, it's also putting a pressure on sales enablement, right? Especially if you're not seen as a strategic business driver, right? I've spoken to many sales enablers. I was recently hiring for a director of enablement as well. And many of the candidates I spoke to had been laid off, unfortunately. And there was one thing I found that was in common. It's a harsh reality. Those people who had been laid off, it didn't occur to me, it didn't seem like that they had proven the value of their function. I had not only seen enablers laid off, but enablement practices as a whole, right? Just say we don't need it anymore. And the reason for that was because they had positioned themselves, or perhaps they were seen, the perception was that this is a cost center that focuses really on onboarding and training. And suddenly when the companies are not hiring, onboarding just becomes less prevalent, less important, right? And so this now brings our focus to, we talked about sales velocity and all those kind of things, but it brings our focus to, well, if we're not focusing just purely on onboarding or operational training for our sellers, what do we focus on? Right? We focus on optimizing their performance, right? And there's a big long line of reasons as to why we do that and how we do it. But really, from my perspective, that is how we can start bringing value in these challenging times that we're in today. How do we optimize performance of the existing function? Yeah,
no, I absolutely agree. I've got a question, actually. I'm going to pop it out as a poll at that point. Because in the current challenging times, I think a lot of enablement teams have been asked to refocus, right? Like, forget everything else. We've just got to get this done. And sales efficiency and optimizing performance, whether you call it performance optimization, sales efficiency, whatever it might be, that's a key metric. And I just want to get a sense from the audience. I've just popped a poll out. Hopefully that will work. Of how many of you are being asked to focus on a key metric that it's changed recently, and you're being asked to focus just on one particular thing. It's only a yes or no question. I'm just going to let everybody pop their answers in there. Interesting how the changes, you can't see the results, so no, I can coming through. So what, interestingly, no is winning so far. In terms of 6% have not been asked to focus. Now, I'm massively curious now to ask, and I don't have a poll set up for this, to ask, what are they being focused on in terms of that, or if indeed they are not being asked to focus on anything. But perhaps that's a whole different thing. But feel free to share in the chat anything that you are being asked to focus on. 40% of you said yes, you're being asked to focus on the key metric. And that's interesting. And whether it's that key metric of sales efficiency or a beauty, measurement lies in the hands of measurers. Aha, what are the metrics C-suite understands yet enablement neglects to address? Fantastic question, Jean-Guillaume. Sales velocity, I think, is that exact element, Kunal, if I'm right, in terms of what's important. But I'm going to come back to that, because I think we're actually going to touch on that later. and also that, Karen, you've asked around how do you share the results with senior leadership. We're going to come back to that. That's something Kunal's done very, very recently that we'll share. What I want to pick up on though is, if you are being asked to focus, now we've talked a lot about focus, understanding focus, being asked to focus in a particular area, challenging times, but I suspect there's a lot of you on the call right now that don't know where to start transitioning into that ability to focus on particular measurable elements. So I want to take just a bit of a more practical moment here to talk about and get your journey, actually, Kunal, about, you've been through this. Where did you start? You've been looking at this 18 months, something like that, longer perhaps. Where did you start? Talk us through your journey.
Yeah, closer to 18 years, to be honest. but I've been with UserZoom as the sort of leader for global enablement, revenue enablement, for nearly 2 years now. And my story is interesting. When I joined the company, I was the first enabler, first of all, and I was responsible for building the enablement function and its strategy and how we execute it. When I first joined, obviously you do your polling, you survey, you talk to people, and you're kind of trying to find out, well, what are the key needs, where are challenges, what are we trying to achieve, what are the hurdles, and what are the key risks to our business, right? And how do we mitigate those risks? And I had lots of different things, all the typical things that you would hear around process, platforms, playbooks, skills. My chief revenue officer was very adamant that onboarding was the thing that we needed to focus on. Right? And one of the first things I did was I used sales velocity to understand what is the benchmarks of this company for each and every single sales velocity component. Right? So where are we coming from? And use that to understand what the trends were quarter on quarter for opportunities, for deal value, average deal value, for average win rate, for average length of sales cycle. Are we going in upward trend or downward trend? The numbers are great, but what's more important is the trend, right? And secondly to that, what I realized was actually onboarding, yes, that could be a priority for us, but we weren't hugely scaling at that time, right? We were just coming out of the pandemic at that time. And what I noticed was actually pipeline seems to be the bigger challenge for us. Maybe not now, but of course, when you think about the lag, right, we're talking 3 or 4 quarters ahead, where there may be a challenge, right? And by then it's kind of too late. You need to do something about it. So when you think about that specific lever of opportunities as part of sales velocity, the question is how do we impact it? What do we do? There's 2 things, or 2 categories at least, in terms of how we impact it. There's things that are related to enablement, and there's things that are not related to enablement, not strictly anyway. The things that are not related to enablement is pretty much what every company will focus on, which is let's throw more heads at it, right? We want to increase pipeline. Let's just hire sales development reps, BDRs. Let's throw more marketing dollars at it, whatever it is. And that's great. But there's also a ton of things we can do as enablers, right, to support that specific metric as part of sales velocity. And that's what I decided to do. So what I actually did was, okay, let's think about this trend. It's kind of looking a little bit, downwards the trend line there. So we need to do something there. The first thing I did was understand the state of the demand generation funnel, our funnel, and we quickly narrowed it down to our sales development representatives. And what we did with those guys was, first of all, let's understand what makes a great SDR. Right? In essence, we defined a competency model and said these are the key competencies and skills, process-related competencies, behavioral competencies that an SDR needs to demonstrate. What are the thresholds? What are the benchmarks we need to see there as well?
Yeah. And
using that, we did a complete manual, literally Excel hell-based assessment of all of our SDRs. Where does the manager think they rank, their SDRs? Literally a scorecard type approach. Yeah. Where do the SDRs themselves think they rate, and what's the benchmark we're setting as to where you should be depending on the role? And the results were so interesting. I mean, it took so long to do, first of all, because it was manual, and secondly, we found the key gaps we found in the assessment that we performed were essentially tied to maybe 3 or 4 competencies, core competencies, which were loosely linked to one another. And at this point, it was a case of, okay, so we found something here. We found globally that we've got some common challenges and common gaps. How do we solve for it? Now, using the sales velocity metric, number one, I was able to, like I said, align our priorities to business strategy, to revenue strategy. And I was able to get stakeholders aligned to that strategy as well, using the sales velocity metric, which is if we can increase this number by X%, this is what it will do for us in the current year, right? So that was quite easy, right, to get buy-in using the metrics, using data. The next thing was, well, it's great knowing all of this information, you know, competency gaps and scores and ratings and all these things, but what do we do about it? That was the key. I mean, that's where we had a challenge. But again, using sales velocity, I was able to justify investment into this. We saw measurable impact that we could make if we solved for these things, and that investment was outsourcing with a training provider who helped us target and build a program against these 3 or 4 competencies and deliver that across towards the end of the year. It was literally a 3-month training program, and the results were pretty spectacular. Straight after that, our trend line just shot up. Yes, there'll be a lot of contributing factors to that, but this was one of the key ones, right? So, one, being able to measure that, tying it to the goals of the organization, and doing something about it. And what this also did was prove the concept that if we can measure behaviors, skills, process-related competencies, understand what the gaps are, and then do something about it, we can make a difference to our business, right, overall. And that allowed us then to invest further, to say, right, if we can do this for this one function within our team, imagine if we could do it for the entire team, right? All different kinds of roles within our revenue function. So that's kind of how we got to this. It all started with looking at the end, right? Starting with the end in mind, with what are we trying to drive? So
we do a similar process, you know, as you know, we start at the end. We say, like, it's part visualization. I think somebody's asked a question, how you know, how do we, because beauty in that lies in the eyes of the beholder, measurement lies in the hands of measures. C-suite understands. It's understanding the goals of the C-suite. It's visualization. It's if you were sitting in a board meeting 12 months, 18 months, 2 years from now, and you are presenting a slide to your investors saying, we nailed it, what's on it? Like, what is on that slide? And there your lagging indicators. There we've got into the enterprise space, and, you know, we'll commonly do this. You know, we've got 50% of our revenues are coming from enterprise clients now. We've started selling to C-level. We're starting to have multi-stakeholder engagement, right? Great. So that's the end goal. But we'll only know that we're there when we're there, and that's lagging, and that's too far away.
Yeah.
So we walk backwards, back. Okay, what are the leading indicators? What are you going to start seeing in 6 months' time that are the green shoots of that are going to tell you, oh, I feel pretty good about that we're going to get to that outcome, so we can carry on, constantly measuring obviously where you're at. And then we start to get, okay, so we're starting to have more meetings in enterprise style accounts. We're having more conversations with this style of stakeholder. We're starting to see average pipeline deal values go up. We're starting to see X, Y, Z. Okay, so that's great. Backwards again. What's contributing to that? Exactly as we're talking about. What's contributing to that? Right. Well, actually, the SDRs are doing X, Y, and Z. Right. Well, why? It's that 5 whys. Right. Why? If you were sitting next to your best SDR in the whole wide world, what are they doing to influence that? Right. Well, they're doing their research. Right. They know exactly who they're talking to. They know how to have a business conversation because they're now talking at C-suites. They can do really well at tying what we do and the problems to the bigger enterprise problems that are existing in that space. So now you're suddenly going, okay, so an end game that we feel we can't influence in 2 years' time, we now understand the measures that we're going to keep looking at again and again, and we now understand the behaviors and skills that we need to cultivate in order to influence that and continually influence it. So walk backwards from your end game, always walking backwards to define what good looks like. And it has to be for each role in your business. I know somebody's asking you share those competencies for SDRs, and that's fine. But it also has to be fit for purpose for what you're trying to achieve. You know, when we're talking, I'd say 85% of the competencies we look at with clients overlap broadly, but getting them right for you, for your terminology, for your market space. Somebody's asking, given the effects of things like market conditions or new product launches on sales, how do we be statistically responsible in tying sales performance to the effect of the sales enablement organization? Again, roll it back. What's the outcome? You've just launched a new product set. What's the outcome, 12 months from now? Well, we want to see 50% of our revenues coming from that new product set, right? That's great. Okay, so what are you starting to see, right? Well, we're starting to see, more pipeline in that product area. Okay, well, how do you start doing that? Right, we now understand that to sell that product, we need to do X, we need to do Y, and we need to do Z, and that's knowledge, behavior, attitude, skill set that you need to change and influence. And then you've got a direct linkage between C-level outcomes, the leading measures that you're looking at, and where you're at. And then to your point, it's really becomes much simpler to say, well, where have we got gaps?
Yeah.
If we understand the measures, we can tie that back to skills and behaviors, we can assess them, and we can correlate and understand and prioritize where we're going to spend our time. And that's really, really, really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. The secret sauce here really is, and this is purely based on my experience, right? Of creating measurable impact through sales enablement to our business, is making sure that you understand what are those lagging performance indicators that you're trying to drive. So you've got to get to the root cause, right? What are you really trying to drive? And those things typically, like you said, will align to the business goals, new product launch, revenue generated, and so on and so forth. Just make sure you have those. Then what are the key things that drive those lagging performance indicators, i.e. the leading performance indicators, behaviors? What are the key, like you said, the green shoots, right? Of change, of transformation, of behavioral change, of performance. What are those things that drive those lagging performance indicators? And if you can correlate those two, it's not easy, but if you can correlate those two and say, yes, these things can drive those lagging performance indicators, you're almost halfway there, right? It's so powerful just to see that and visualize it. And also when you're trying to get buy-in from your stakeholders as to, these are the things that drive these metrics. It just makes so much more sense. That alignment.
And what's in it for me, right?
What's in it for you?
I immediately know why am I going on this training course again when I should be out selling, right? Because I've made the connection that if I go on this, it's going to impact that competency, which is going to have an impact on my ability to raise pipeline, which means I'm going to hit my target. It's that connectivity massively.
Yeah. I saw an article recently, by the way, Kate. I think it's probably on LinkedIn, that talked about what do we align ourselves to, right? And you've got some options, right? Just a lot of people may align themselves to that lagging indicator, pipeline, average deal size, win rates, time to close, all these kind of things. And then there's those who align themselves to the things that drive those indicators. I think that's the key. If we can get that right, then that's the key, because we can get lost otherwise, right? We can get lost in a plethora of things if we just align ourselves to what's at the end.
And it also seems like such an impossible mountain to climb. It's so far away. I can't see how I can impact that number. It's just so, and it's about going backwards and breaking it down. I'm curious. We were talking. You can be quite clear here that Kunal and I are fans of using a competency framework or skills framework. So I'm just going to launch a quick poll. I'm keen to understand of everybody on the call what sort of level of maturity we've got out there in terms of using a skills framework. Some people call it a skills matrix, capability framework, competency framework, however you define it. I'm keen to know what we've got out there in terms of those. Okay. It's quite funny seeing this moving. We've got quite a few. I don't have one, but it's in the plan. Good to see. We've got. I have one and I'm using it. That's fantastic. I have one, but I'm not using it. That's a common pitfall that we see, right? It's hard to maintain. Somebody asked a question. That takes either spreadsheet gymnastics or applications with CRM data feed integrations. Trying to get that done can just feel an impossible task. You talked about your experience at the beginning. It took a long time, right? So I get it. have one, I'm using it. Right, I have one, I don't have one. So we're winning, I don't have one, but it's in the plan, closely followed by I have one and I'm using it. And I'm going to ask a second follow-up to that in a moment. But given that we've talked about this skills framework, right? Given and again, interchanging terminology, guys. Somebody said I'd love to use my skills matrix, but it's been a slog on how to get my sales manager on board and implementing it.
Yeah.
Right. That's, walking backwards is a key aspect of that, making that connectivity, and we'll come to that. But it all starts with this whole subject matter we've been talking about around measuring. How do you actually measure skills and behaviors and competencies? Kunal, what's your experience of how you've gone about doing that?
So as enablement, we don't measure it, right? We're more interested in the outcome of that measurement process. Mm-hmm. It is about getting our sales leadership on board, right? As well as the reps themselves, like the quota carriers, the people who do it on the field. So the first thing, I think, one of the challenges I've just mentioned there in the chat is, how do you get your managers on board with this? First of all, the primary thing is tie it to what's in it for them, right? Make sure there's a clear correlation that these things will drive those things that you care about and you have to care about, right? Mm-hmm. Clear correlation. So the first thing I did when I was kind of launching all of this was put it up in a slide, quite literally. Here are the metrics you care about, and here are the things that are going to drive it. Quite literally, one visual, no text, it's just visualization of exactly what will drive it, and that just really gets the message across. So that correlation is key, right? That's something that us as enablers can certainly work on and have validated by our sales leadership as well. Mm-hmm. Right? They need to be bought into it, so that they're saying, okay, yeah, you know what, there might be another skill or another behavior that I'm looking for that drives that specific metric. That's the first thing. But once they're on board, it's a case of asking those leaders, and this is my experience, right? This may not be best practice. This is how we got to it. We asked those sales leaders to carve out some time, which is as hard as it is, especially in Q4, to carve out some time to assess their teams, and quite literally give for each member of their team, each rep, AE, SDR, whatever the role is, a set of competencies that we're measuring them against, again, which we know is tied to the lagging metrics, and assess them out of 1 to 4, 1 to 5 rating scale, making sure that they understand what a 1 actually means and what a 5 actually means. Right, that's the key, because one of the common pitfalls in all of this is a 5 to 1 manager is different from a 5 to another manager, right? And suddenly you kind of end up in a bit of a skewed data set, right, at the end.
I think as well. Yeah. Another comment on that is you're absolutely right on describing what you mean by those ratings, but also to get the consistency. It's saying it's helping managers so that you get consistency from one manager to another or one rep to another. Is when I talk about problem discovery, what do I mean? Like, let's be really explicit on the positive behaviors and the positive examples that I'm looking for. Do you, in every call, do you ask for problems? Do you probe performance? Do you then spin off into implications? Do you play that back to the clients so that they validate that as a problem base? Being clear, not just I feel pretty good about the fact that I problem discover. Yeah, problem discover the shit out of that. Isn't helpful to anybody. It's being specific. Very specific,
yeah. Asking our sales leadership to quite literally assess. Now, I did this with a view in mind, which was whatever rating you're providing, right? If you're going to give someone a 2 out of 5 or 1 out of 5, let's say, you've got to make sure it's defendable, right? It's justifiable, because these ratings are also going to be visualized by the reps themselves, and they're going to ask, why did you give me a 2 here? Now, that's the first challenge, but actually it's a good challenge, because what is one of the core reasons for attrition in a sales team? Disconnection with manager, right? Frustration, friction. That's where the root cause, and then it builds up to other things, right? Having that conversation as to why I think you're a 2 and you maybe think you're a 5, and let's come to a alignment there, is a way to just alleviate that risk, right? Yeah. Having the conversation, it's so simple, but the data just drives that conversation to happen. Yeah.
And it's not just simple, but the power of them being able to use that conversation to identify how they bridge that gap.
Yep.
Even between manager and rep. You know, I know you're interested in the outcomes from an enablement perspective, so you can plan and effectively interact there. But the power of that sudden alignment and understanding between rep and manager is phenomenal, because then it's, well, I want to be a 5. Okay, how do I get there? What is it that we're going to do to get me there? Because I really want to be. Now that brings me on to just something I just want to touch on, because we had a few people saying you've got one, you're using it, not using it. I'm going to ask the question to the audience, and then I want to ask you, which is, how often do you refresh and remeasure, right? Because if you're measuring it, it cannot, well, in my opinion, it cannot be a one-time thing. So I'm just going to launch this just to get a sense of those who do have a framework. How often do you actually go back and refresh it? Now this is quite polarizing here. We're getting, I've never refreshed it. It's quite ahead at the moment. And more often than annually. Okay, that's nice. There's a balance between never and more often than annual, but never's definitely winning. Okay, so of those of you who have done it, yeah, we've got that. Okay, that's great. Thank you. How often do you intend or plan to go forward and refresh yours? You know,
at a minimum annually, but the real answer is as and when it's needed, right? And what I mean by that is, we're in a constantly evolving world, right? When it comes to sales, and when it comes to our ability to execute, that ability changes as time goes by. Sometimes in quarter and quarter, based on market conditions, you know, whatever is telling us. So how do we implement a level of agility and nimbleness in our sales organization to be able to change direction when it's needed, right? We cannot remain static, because if we just do this, run this process annually, it's too late, right? Quarters have been missed. People are disenfranchised. You know, they're demotivated. It's kind of been lost, right?
Yeah.
So it needs to happen as frequently as it possibly can, right? There's some best practices in terms of what that frequency actually looks like, but refreshing the framework as and when it's needed. One quarter you might be focused on a certain market, whereas in the following quarter you might not be, right, based on where the market's gone. Yeah. How do we deliver a way for our reps to focus on the right things at the right time, right? And actually those activities, those actions, and the execution of those activities are observed, are fed back on, are coached, right? Frequently. It's through a model, right? It's through a skills framework. We want you to do this. So now the manager can, you know, define what that actually is and feedback on it, observe against it, and coach against it. So yeah, I mean, you know, at a minimum once a year, but I think as we're seeing right now, it's probably a lot more frequently than that.
Yeah, I think, you know, you touched on some of the side benefits there, Kunal, and I want to finish today's session on specifically coming back to you in a minute, but some of the side benefits that drive how often you should do it. Coaching, if you're going to organize an SKO, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to plan what you're going to cover content-wise in the SKO, you want to know what content's going to have the biggest impact to your team. So assess again against your competency framework, refresh it. If you're going to make a strategic investment decision or a change, or you're launching a new product, or you decided to move from enterprise to SaaS to on-prem to whatever, you need to refresh, reevaluate, and reassess so that you can understand and react to sales enablement to that, and be aligned to the feelings, the thoughts, the performance of the sales team. So I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
I know that you've sort of been using this actively right now, and I just wanted to sort of finish before we just cover some questions on some of the things that you've been able to do as a result. How have you used this insight yourself?
First of all, I think this also goes back to the question we had around, you know, it's a slog getting managers on board. Would anybody disagree if I said that at least 50% of a sales manager's role is to coach? At least. I don't think anybody would disagree, right? That's my view. So the what's in it for them, it's half of your job. Quite literally, it's half of the role. If you're not coaching your teams and you're just focusing on a transactional and operational aspect of what our reps do, then that's not, there's nothing in it for the reps, there's nothing in it for the manager. And this is one of the key reasons as to why reps are demotivated. In fact, I did see a statistic from Harvard Business Review which said those companies that do training alone kind of deliver, good training alone deliver 22% productivity improvements to the sales organizations, that versus those who combine training and continuous coaching who deliver up to 80%. That's a huge productivity difference.
Huge.
And there's some breakdown of that as well. Why do reps leave roles? Because of the manager. And one of the reasons why they leave the manager is because the manager isn't a good coach. There's no development for them. How do they get better? How do they hit the targets and goals that they need to hit and progress as well, right? So this is absolute key in gaining that adoption. So yeah, that's kind of my viewpoint on that. Yeah.
And you've recently done some work, if I recall, with kind of the board, and there's been a couple of questions around how do you present this stuff to the board so that they get it, because not in the weeds. I know you had something that you were going to walk through. Do you want to share? Because I know there's a few questions around that. Yeah.
So let me just share my screen, because this is kind of going to be interesting. This is kind of when we talk about outcomes, right? So hopefully you're able to see my screen here. Okay, so what we're saying here is essentially a matrix. It's a performance versus competency matrix. So on the vertical axis, you're seeing kind of sales performance. And I've kind of hidden exactly what this metric is. Some of the numbers, obviously, it's fictional. So this is a bit of a dummy data here, but it's not too close from what most companies would see if they were to plot out performance, right, for the teams. The numbers on the left indicate not a number, but a percentile versus a top performer, right? So the person you see right at the top there in the middle is our top performer, and everybody else is as a percentile against them. Whereas in the horizontal axis, we're seeing competence, right? Again, as a percentile. So essentially we're mapping somebody's actual performance, right? Information which comes from the CRM, perhaps, versus the competence, right? The actual score that they've been rated against a mixture or combination of multiple competencies. And then we see some color coding in here as well, which is kind of what we've overlaid. So in the green zone, obviously our top performers, right? The higher up you are, the better you're performing. In the yellow, sort of your mid to average sort of level performance, and then we see some red and orange zone. What is it that we can tell our senior leadership, right? When we look at something like this, when we plot our reps against this kind of a chart. The top right, top performers, and they have the potential and they've got the ability, most importantly, right? They demonstrate the competence to do their jobs. So what are the retention strategies? How do we keep these people in our company? I mean, we cannot ignore that, right? Yeah. How do we retain these people? Are we thinking about promotions, incentivization, roles, additional responsibilities? What is it? We need to keep them, right? Right attitude, right behaviors, right skills, and perform, right? They convert it to performance. These guys here, they're top performers also, but there's room for growth. They can raise the bar even further, right? Because they're not quite towards the right-hand side in terms of competence, but they are certainly up there in terms of performance. And then you have these people here on a sort of mid-right. They have the ability, they demonstrate a level of competence, but why they're not performing? Why they're not in that green zone? This is a key question that we ask as enablers, but also as sales managers, sales leaders, right? Which is, what's happening here? Are they bored? Have they just taken their foot off the pedal? Are they kind of demotivated for some reason because, for whatever reason? Are they looking to exit, perhaps? But we can ask our questions and make an assessment and act on that insight. This is one of my favorite quadrants or sections of this chart. This is what I call a sweet spot, right? These are the people who have the potential to be top performers, right? So if we can move them to the right, they should in theory move up to the green as well, right? Yeah. So it's kind of going diagonally towards the top right.
Big impact stuff there, yeah.
With the right coaching. Now, in many teams, sometimes this is I call this a sweet spot because it's that low-hanging fruit almost, which is if we can convert these guys into the green zone, we can be hitting and smashing targets, right? Just with these guys. Obviously, we've got to take actions against everyone else I've mentioned around making decisions. How do we keep them? How do we retain them? But converting these people into the green zone is really key. Then, of course, we have some of the more not so positive areas. What's happening down here? Are these people in ramp? If so, how do we accelerate them? Are they genuinely low performers with low potential? What decisions do we make? I've seen companies where they've held on to salespeople for a year before they've realized, this is not working out, no deals. And versus those who spot the signs early, right? Even through ramp, they implement this kind of performance scoring, competency coaching, and assessment through ramp, and they're able to kind of measure them and say, yeah, this person is showing the hallmarks and the key demonstrations of somebody who's not going to succeed. And harsh reality of this is, what do we do for our revenue function, right? Do we talk about exit or do redirection in some way? And then we've got this whole person here. What is this? A behavioral attitude, challenge, of what is happening here? But let's ask the question. So we have found this to be extremely enlightening for our sales leadership, for us as enablers, because suddenly we can see what this sweet spot. What are the things in common? Are there certain skills, behaviors, competencies that are in common across these people? And how do we define an enablement strategy, build an enablement strategy, but targets, in the right areas at the right time for the right people, as opposed to a sales leader for, everybody here saying, oh, we need to focus on objection handling. I'm sure we've all heard that, right? It's one of the commonest things that we see. And actually, is it? Are these people here because of objection handling, or is there something more important, right? That's how we at UserZoom drive our enablement strategy now. And this is one of the key components of that is this chart.
And do you know what strikes me is alignment here. It's being able to have everybody have that eureka moment of alignment. I get it. I get the relationship and correlation between performance and competence. I get how it can help me and be insightful to the strategies that I deploy for different people. And even if you want to drill down and say, I would like to look at this against a particular competency and see which is that's driving the biggest performance. But absolute phenomenal insight in order to help you focus in on each of those areas, which is key. Now, there's a couple of questions come through. That I'd like to know. Akram, you asked earlier, the ultimate goal is to tie sales performance to enablement assets and programs. However, that takes either spreadsheet gymnastics or applications with CRM data feed integrations. Can you share your thoughts on the easiest measurements that one person or small teams can start doing today to make an impact and start having value-based conversations with sales leadership? Now, I've got my thoughts on that very strongly, but any thoughts that you wanted to share there, Kunal?
Spreadsheet gymnastics, I like that. I went through that, right? Like I said, it was spreadsheet hell, and a lot of kind of copying and pasting and all those kind of things, and it's always room for errors and challenges, right? But sometimes it has to be done to prove the concept. That is the way I looked at it, right? How do we prove the concept of, if we are able to identify the key gaps in the team, put a plan and strategy in place to address those key gaps, solve for them, and measure the outcomes and say, you know what, we did this thing and it actually had a measurable impact, right? If you can do that, then that justifies investment to scaling this, because that manual process, bottom line, doesn't scale. It doesn't scale. You can do it as a one-off, maybe once a quarter, perhaps depending on the size of the team, maybe once a year for a lot of people, depending, if they're talking about large sales team. That's not enough, because by the end of the year, by the time we've done it, it's too late. Your window for change and development, product development and progress is gone, right? And all of the knock-on effects of that. So prove the concept, I would say, but use that to justify investment in a way to build a model, perhaps even purchase a platform which is integrated with sales performance metrics to get there. That's how we did it. Yeah,
and you're doing that across about 150 salespeople, right? Globally.
Which is not huge, right, in grand scheme of things. But even 50 was hard, I'll be honest. Even 50.
Yeah. We've had a chat from my eyesight's dreadful. A chat from Sasha here, and we have data in different platforms. We have a revenue operations team responsible for data analytics. they've agreed to help, but it's taking ages. How do you get the dashboards and reports and data together? I promise this isn't a plant. Genuinely, that is a question from Sasha in the chat.
Sounds so blunted, but yeah, once we had proved the concept, I was able to justify investment for a platform, essentially, to do all this for us. And then, like any platform that you may purchase, to add to your tech stack, it requires alignment across your revenue org, right, including revenue ops, sales ops, IT, whatever functions you may have in your business. And one of those key activities is around integration. But it all ties back to what are we trying to impact, right? That's your business case, essentially. If we can impact these measures by X, Y, and Z%, right, what does that mean to our business? There's an ROI. It's pretty simple, really, when you think about it, right? You just need to know what those measures are, and deliver the message accordingly. And that's how I personally was able to get our organization aligned to do these things, right? And continue doing it.
Yeah, and just to summarize everything that Kunal said there, Sasha, E4Enable does that. I'm gonna whisper that on the call.
Yeah, I guess it does.
So anybody that wants to have a look at it afterwards, absolutely, I'm more than happy to do that. But I've got a couple more questions with the last 4 minutes that I want to do, that I want to cover. Actually, interesting, Conan's asked, what about the person in the top left corner? What would you do with them? Top performer, but no real level of competency. Are they a one deal wonder? I'll answer that for you. Yeah, if they've got no real competency, either they're underutilized, they've got massive potential if you develop them in the right way to exhibit the right behaviors, or they're likely that they've been in the right place at the right time. But if they're having low competency measures, then that would still be a red flag, potentially for me, particularly dependent on how your competency framework is built in the first place. Yeah, absolutely. Couple of other questions. Is this true? Right, sorry, Krishna, I'm not sure that this was a point in time. Is this a true behavioral competency? Is this true of behavioral competencies too, or is it likely we see almost 100% overlap across most business for behavioral comp per role? I'm not sure if you want to type out something different to that, because I'm not clear on what that is. Thanks for whispering that. I did not notice the big E for enable. Back. What E for enable in my background? I didn't notice there was a big E for enable sign in my background. Any other questions that anybody wants to think? Conan, thank you very much for that question. Any other comments in here that I can see? Otherwise, we'll draw today to a close. No. Okay, we have a long way to go. Nigel, I agree. We have a long way to go to get people coaching, but it's absolutely key. Right, well, given the fact that we're on 57 minutes, if nobody has any more time, I just want to thank you so much, Kunal, for sharing that with me, and particularly the audience, and for answering their questions, and also for sharing how you use your competency framework and the measures that you're doing. We'll send out a recording of today's session if anybody wants to take part in it, but we'll also send out, there's been a couple of questions on links to information and to example competency frameworks, which we'll also send out after today. And if anybody does need help or wants to see how to visualize, measure, and implement the type of strategy that Kunal's talked about, then hit me up on LinkedIn, or equally Kunal. I'm sure you won't mind being nudged on LinkedIn for your thoughts as well.
Of course, yeah.
All right, brilliant. Thank you so much, Kunal. Thank you everybody for your time and your questions and your comments and engagement. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a blast.
Thanks. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.